Hello and welcome to Tech Raven. I'm Nigel and today I'm talking about photography studios and what is the absolute minimum size that you can get away with if you're thinking of setting up a photography studio. Maybe you're thinking of renting a small space somewhere so you can set up a studio, or maybe even converting one of the rooms in your house. So during this video, I'm going to be talking about a few things that you're going to have to bear in mind. The absolute minimum requirements for length, width and height that you can get away with realistically, as well as a few other things such as what color should it be finished in, and drapes, and whether it should have windows or not, all those kinds of things. Now, I'm quite fortunate because in my village there's quite a large space that I can use free of charge anytime I like. But the only drawback to that, even though it's huge and it's got nice tall ceilings and it's fantastic, it's not my space. Even though I can use it free of charge because I know the person that owns it, it does mean that I've got to basically take all my equipment out of the cupboard, like 8 or 9 lights, background support, C-stands, backgrounds, props, all kinds of things, load up my car, drive them around there, spend 90 minutes setting all that up. After the shoot, spend another 90 minutes tearing it all down, load it all back in the car, bring it back home, pack it all away in the cupboard again. And yes, I can leave the stuff there for 3, 4 or 5 days on the trot and have the key, but because it's not my studio, I can't leave my stuff there all the time. Although it's great, it's not ideal. So in certain instances, there's a couple of studios not too far from me that are dedicated photography studios that I will rent for either a couple of hours, a morning, an afternoon, or a whole day. And the good thing about this is that all the lights are there. There's plenty of lighting equipment, strobes with softboxes, backgrounds, reflectors, props, all kinds of stuff. So all I do is I rent it for a couple of hours if I'm doing a photo shoot for a friend or a model or a portrait shoot. And I will call the owner of the studio in advance and say, look, can you set it up with like a 3-point lighting or a beauty dish clamshell lighting setup, or maybe something with, a pink colorama backdrop and a nice sort of chaise lounge chair, something like that. So when I get to the studio, it's all set up and practically ready to go. So all I have to do then is pop my trigger on the camera, make a few tweaks to the lights in the settings and ratios and angles, that kind of thing, and away I go. And after the shoot, I just put my camera back in the car and off I go. Sorted. It's nice and easy. But during this video, like I said, I'm going to cover your own studio. So again, if you're thinking of renting a space, these are going to be the requirements, and these are quite important. Now on the computer, I've got a couple of images. I've got a product shot of a guitar, and I've got a portrait shot that I did for a friend of mine. But I did both of these in my living room, in my house. So I've got some behind the scenes photographs that I took of this so you can see how big my living room is. I'm going to give you the dimensions and explain why it was problematic and troublesome. And you'll see for yourself why these shots were difficult to achieve in my living room. And then I'm going to give you the requirements in terms of sizes and other things that you're going to need. And I'm not going to be talking about equipment, what lights, what stands or anything like that. I'm talking about the pure basic photography studio space and how it needs to be before you even move any equipment in there. So let me jump onto the computer and show you these two photographs with some background shots, some behind the scenes shots, so you can see how it was done, the light placement, and I'll explain the trouble that I had. And again, I'll cover what it is that you're going to need for an absolute minimum requirements in terms of space and other things for a photographic studio. Okay, check this out. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a couple of shots. So this is the first shot that I took in my living room. It's a product shot, and this is another example that I'm going to show you again in my living room. So this first one is a Gretsch guitar that I borrowed off a friend. In fact, a lot of people have said it looks like a render even, but I'm going to explain why that is in a minute. And this is how it was done. With regard to this shot, it was basically taken with this setup here. So I'll get onto that one in a minute. So getting back to this first shot of the guitar and this setup in my living room. Now, my living room dimensions are quite small. It is actually 14 foot 10 inches long, which is 4.5 meters. So from this wall on the right going across to the window is 14 foot 10 or 4.5 meters. And then the width from this wall behind the TV to the wall behind this sofa going across is 10 foot 7 inches, which is 3.2 meters. And then the height from floor to ceiling is 7 foot 8 inches, which is 2.4 meters in height. Now, these dimensions and trying to do this product shot in my living room was just too much of a struggle. It was just all too tight. You can see the camera is on the tripod over here on the left, pointing down, and the camera is at a bit of an angle. It's kind of twisted over to its side to actually get this angle on the final shot. So basically what I've got here is the guitar is basically mounted on a stand with kind of like some soft padding underneath it to stop it scratching on the back. And then to this side, I've got this white foam board. And to this side, I've got another white foam board on two stands. And then a piece of white foam board that's been bent in an arch. So I've got white here, arching round, and white here. Now, the reason I've got all this white surrounding the guitar is because it's acting as a reflector coming around these edges here, up this edge and across this edge. Now, if I didn't have those, what would happen is this edge over here on the guitar, which is this edge up here at the top, there would be a reflection in that of this guitar on the wall and this loudspeaker and part of the TV. All this stuff on the wall would be reflecting in this edge of the guitar up here. So basically, by having this white foam board there and the white board bent around here, it's basically stopping any mirror type reflections of anything that's on the walls or even this sofa, because the sofa here on this edge and this white cushion would be reflected into this side of the guitar. So basically along this edge here, around where the jack is for the cable, and on this edge here, there would actually be reflections of the sofa. So that's why I've got that. Across the top, I've got a scrim, which is a large roll. As you can see, I've got a C-stand at the back here, and along there, I've got the roll going onto a horizontal pole of Lee full diffusion. Now, this is a scrim that's basically suspended. Ideally, it should be stapled to a large wooden frame, but this is just suspended. Hence, there's a slight droop in the middle going right across the top of the guitar here. And then above that, I've got a single bare bulb Bowens GM500 strobe light coming through this. And again, the reason I've got this big scrim here is because if it wasn't there, across the top of the guitar, you would see a reflection of the light. And on top of that, you'd also see a reflection of this Artex pattern in the ceiling. All that would be reflected into the guitar. So this large scrim here is preventing that from happening, and that is what is giving this beautiful soft gradations of light as it gradates from light to dark. That is why that is happening. I've also got another light here with some diffusion material over it, which is also going through the scrim to basically light up this area of the guitar a little bit more. And finally, over here, I've got a snooted light acting as a little bit of a spot. And it's also got a miniature honeycomb grid on the very front of it here, just sending a little spot of light just onto the top of the guitar head. So the actual headstock and these machine heads are being lit by that separate light. Now, this had to be set up very carefully, and this is where I'm going to get on to, why this is just such a tiny, small, impossible space to work on. Because if I was standing over here by the tripod, and you'll notice this Waitrose bag is basically full of some weights to weigh the tripod down, because I wanted that to be as solid as possible, because this was going to be a focus stacked shot. So I took several photographs, and the images that I took, I first focused on this section of the guitar right here. Then I focused for the next shot on the logo, and then I took a third shot focusing on this section here, and then another one there, and another one at this front pickup. And then I took 3 shots going down the neck at various stages, and then the final shot of the headstock. So there was several shots here. So it's important that everything was solid. Now, when I had to move around, I had to duck down under this, because I'm not sure if you can see on this photograph, but that is right up against the wall where that scrim starts. So I had to go from the camera after getting the composition right and duck under it and carefully walk around the edge of the guitar, being careful not to knock the headstock here while going over to this light to make some little adjustments. And then, of course, when I had to walk around the other side, I had to crawl over the sofa to get around it. And it was just all a big faff. Now, those with keen eyes, yes, I've got a 4-litre canister here that's basically full, because when I actually did the shoot, I couldn't find my sandbags. So that's what that is. So as you can see, it's just all very tight, and it's just all too difficult to work in a studio this small. Now, I'm just going to cover this next shot for a second before coming on to some essentials with regard to dimensions and how the studio should be laid out. This is a portrait that I took for a friend of mine, and this is basically the setup. So if I go to this shot, we've got this little sort of stool here. So she was sitting on that with her feet on this, with her knees up to her chest, as you can see here in the image. Now, in this shot, it's just a large reflector over the top. This is one of those sort of multi things where you get gold, silver, black, white, and the diffuser to shoot through. And if I go to this lower angle here, you can see I've got silver on the bottom, I've got a silver reflector on this side, and then I've got a large octabox on the floor pointing up. So when the girl was sitting on this chair, her head was about here, just a little bit above the door handle, and basically that softbox is shining up from this angle, coming up towards her face, and you can see the catchlight there. And then the silver reflector behind is throwing a little bit of light back into this side of the face, and the silver reflector above is pushing some light down onto the top of her head from above. So that's how that was done. And as you can see here by these shots, there isn't really much room. Again, I had to sort of climb over the sofa there to get around it, or duck underneath and try and walk around. And you can see that this softbox here, the octabox on the floor, the bottom section of it is touching the wall on this side. And then this side, there's hardly any room to move at all. And that was just to achieve this quite tightly cropped head and shoulders shot using this kind of setup. Now, getting back to this first guitar shot, the reason, again, it looks like a bit of a render is because if you look on the floor, I've got this black velvet on the floor, which essentially is behind the guitar. It's the background because the camera's up here shooting down. So this is the background. So I've got all this black material all over the floor to act as a background, and it's quite light absorbent material, so nothing's going to reflect back off it. But even after doing that, parts of the image had some very light grey areas that you could just about make out, so I had to actually just paint them in black a little bit and just adjust a curve on this background just to make it absolutely black. Now, getting back to the actual realistic size that I think a studio needs to be, I'm going to work in meters from here on out. So again, my living room is 4.5 meters long, and it's 3.2 meters wide, and it's 2.4 meters high. Realistically, it needs to be getting on for double that. It ideally needs to be 9.2 meters long at the absolute minimal. Now, feel free to write this down, and I'm going to explain why this is the minimum dimensions you want to be going for. So you want to be thinking 9.2 meters long, and you also want to be thinking 6.1 meters wide, and for a ceiling height, instead of 2.4 meters high, you want to be thinking 3.7 at the absolute minimum, but preferably 4.6 meters high. Now, I'm going to go through those dimensions and explain why. And yes, I know some people shoot in garage studios, but if you ask them, they'll say, yes, it can be done for basic stuff, but it is a struggle. And in my opinion, you can only really do head and shoulders shots in the limited space of a typical UK single garage. In America, your garages are probably going to be huge and it'll be a different thing. But in the UK, they're kind of quite small. And you can only really do a head and shoulders shot in that sort of environment. Now, if you were to try and do a full-length portrait shot, like a fashion shot, a full-length fashion shot, with ideally a typical portrait lens of between 80 and 120 millimeters, for a full-length fashion shot in a small studio, such as a garage or even something like this living room here, you would never be able to do it because you won't be able to get far enough back, and you're going to end up using something like a 35 millimeter lens to do that full-length shot. And then the proportions are going to be slightly out because that's heading into wide angle territory. So the bodily dimensions and proportions are going to look a little bit distorted. So ideally, you need a 100mm portrait lens, even for full length fashion shots. And that's going to mean a room or a studio that is about 9.2 meters long, as opposed to the 4.3 meters long that I have here. So that's the main reason for the length. So it allows you to do a full length fashion shot with a proper 100mm portrait lens, and you've got enough room, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a back wall or a colorama paper or some other backdrop, and then the model is going to be standing 6 or 7 foot away from that, because you're going to need lights on the floor behind her shining up towards the wall, and there's going to have to be a space between where your model is standing and the back wall. So you've got 7 or 8 foot that's gone there for a start. And then you're going to need your sort of 15, 18 foot to stand away from her the other way with a 100mm lens to get a full length portrait shot. So that's the reason for that length. Now, in terms of width, again, my living room here is 3.2 meters wide, and ideally you need 6.1 meters wide. So in feet, that would be going from about 10'7" to what I have here to 20 foot wide. So nearly double the width. And the reason for that is even without the sofa and the TV and all this gubbins, even if you took all that out of the living room, there's still not nearly enough width. Now, at the end of the day, this is a product shot of a guitar, but you'd still require this same amount of space to take a photograph of a watch. You still need this large scrim, you still need all this lighting equipment, possibly even more, a couple more spots, and this space is just still going to be too small even for that, even with nothing else in the room. So the reason I'm talking realistically about, 20 foot wide or 6.1 wide in meters is so that with all the lighting stuff set up, you've got room, plenty of room to walk around the perimeter. And if you've got assistants and stuff walking around the outside, you've got plenty of room to work. And it also allows you to move the lights further back and be a little bit more accurate with your lighting. Now, when it comes to the ceiling height, this is something a lot of photographers forget about when they go and check out spaces to rent for studios, especially if it's like an office space where the ceilings aren't necessarily that high. Now, the reason ceiling height is important is because, as you can see here in my living room, the ceiling height is 7 foot 8 inches, which is 2.4 meters. And this light at the top here, that electrical cable at the back is literally touching the ceiling. And even then, it wasn't really far enough away. I wanted it a little bit higher, so I had to actually compromise. And worse still, there's no way I could do that standing fashion shot with a large overhead softbox directly above the model looking down. There just wouldn't be space for that. Now, realistically, in terms of height, you would want the ceiling to be 3.7 meters high, which is about 12 foot at the absolute minimum, but preferably 15 foot high, which is 4.6 meters. Because with 4.6 meters high, you can have a large octabox directly above the model, with the model standing directly underneath it, and there will be room for that, with space between the softbox baffle at the front and the top of the model's head, allowing you to get a full-length shot. So that is the dimensions that I would recommend as a minimum. 9.2 meters long, 6.1 meters wide, and a minimum of 3.7 meters high, but preferably 4.6 meters high if you want to have a softbox above a standing model. Now, when it comes to what color you should finish the studio in, this back wall here, I actually painted it white. So I've got a small white background, which is what you can see here. And I've actually warmed it up a little bit in post-production in this shot. But if you look here, you can see this left wall here is magnolia and the back wall is actually white. So in terms of what color you should finish your studio walls, I would recommend whitewashing the whole thing. So I'm talking ceiling, walls and floor, everything whitewashed, just white everywhere. The reason for this is because you can then use these white walls as reflectors. It's going to bounce light back, and that's going to come in handy. But you might be thinking about, what about when you don't want any light reflecting back and you want it all to be basically negative fill, just blacked out everywhere? Well, what I would recommend for that is, again, whitewash the whole studio. But then if you can have some kind of runners or rails going across the corner of the ceiling here, with some black drapes that you can draw open and close, like curtains that are basically going to cover the whole wall. So black drapes across all four walls around the edges that you can draw them all across to have black walls all around with kind of a black velvet or light absorbent material that's not going to allow anything to reflect back. So that's what I would do for that. And for the ceiling, a similar thing, just have some panels made up with, again, some black velvet type material on some large panels that you can just pop up and velcro to the ceiling as and when required. Now, you might need several panels to do this that you just velcro up quickly, and when they're not in use, you can just basically pull them down and have them stacked up in the corner. And as for the floor, a whitewashed floor, just painted white, is going to be the best option. And then if required, you can have just black material on the floor to work in the same way as the black panels on the ceiling. So that's what I would recommend. Whitewashed with black drapes that you can draw around the walls and things that you can attach to the ceiling, and just black material to put on the floor. And that will be a very good option. Okay, so that's it. I hope you found this video somewhat useful, and I hope you picked up a few useful hints and tips from it. If you like the video, give it a like, and as usual, subscribe. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.